So today on the hiring show, we have Susan Wiemeyer. Susan and I met through a mutual, well, my friend, probably an acquaintance to you through business, and super excited to have her here today. Susan, thanks so much for coming on the hiring room.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Renee, for inviting me. Looking forward to our chat.
Yes, me too. So, just for, some reference sake for people who are listening, Susan is this powerhouse sales executive who worked at some really, really big names in her career, which I'm excited to kind of hear about the ins and outs of some of those large organizations. And she now, as she has turned her talents to doing some fractional and consulting work in the field of sales, which I would imagine is always in high demand.
Yes, the world of fractional sales leadership is still really just evolving, but it is in great demand and the chance to really bring it to smaller businesses, smaller and mid-sized businesses that don't have the opportunity to hire in at the level the big companies do.
Okay, so it's new, huh? I would think that that would be something that would be, I don't know, it's right. Without sales, you don't have a company.
Correct. But I think what most people will often do is bring on a full-time person. So then sales leadership and the act of managing their sales process is still often founder-led. In the smaller businesses, the owners and the founders will do that and will hold on to that. And then as the business grows and they need to scale, then they determine that they need to bring in outside leadership. It's a
Okay,
little
got it.
newer in terms of the fractional disciplines. Things like marketing have been much more mature in the fractional world, as has the CFO role. And
Yeah,
now the CSO, CROs, chief sales roles, they are evolving and they are very much having their moment right now.
got it. You know what I was thinking? Because, I mean, I'm in sales, right? And been doing it forever. Not the way I mean, not at your level. Lord knows I'm sure I could use some real good coaching from you. We have to talk. But what are the differences? If I think about, you were at Microsoft, you were in the software space. What are the differences between building a team in those environments versus a small company that has a founder?
Right, right. I think some of it, obviously, the political layers and things like that exist in the bigger companies that do not in the smaller. But some of the foundational pieces are there. I mean, I think you have to build strong talent to start, right? And so you have to determine what is going to be the makeup and segmentation of your sales team, right? How do you decide what territories or what customers, markets, things like that people go after? And I think what most people don't realize is that sales leadership is a process more than it is an art. Yes, you have to have strong relationships and instincts and things like that, but a good process will go so much further than gut instinct will over time. And one of the very much parallels between both of those is that both need to have really strong, solid processes in place. They're just different levels of complexity. The larger companies are going to have much more nuances, much larger organizations, much greater layering and things like that in between. Where in the smaller businesses, you might have a very small, simple structure, but you still need to make sure that you have strong, differentiated product, that you have a lead generation environment and a CRM system and a way to divide out leads, and that you have a really strong way to measure and metric your salespeople so that you know, are they performing or not? And a
Right.
way to look at and review pipeline and forecast, and a way to go in and adjust whenever needed.
Well, I think about myself, right? And even yourself, we're solo entrepreneurs right now. I wasn't for a long time, but I have been the last number of years. And, we don't have a brand. You think of Oracle or Infor or Microsoft, do things just happen because of the branding as opposed to a small company I mean, you can have branding within your industry though, right? It may not be a household name, of course, but do you see that as like an uphill battle? What do you do? How do you handle that?
That is definitely a challenge in the smaller businesses. Brand means a lot. And those large entities, those large names, the Oracles, the VMwares, the Microsofts, they spent a lot of money in building
Right.
that, a
Yeah.
lot of money and time over building out that recognition. And so, yes, you can get meetings with, very, very little difficulty if you start with one of those brand names, right? They open doors for you. And so, yes, in that initial brand awareness phase of a sales cycle with a customer, there is no doubt that the bigger companies have an edge. And so smaller companies they have to figure out more creative ways to open those doors. Once the door is opened, I think the playing fields level a lot more because then you have to understand your customers' problems and challenges and solve them. And a smaller company can still do that effectively. I think that initial brand can sometimes be intimidating to customers as well. Not everyone wants to
Interesting.
work with the very large
I hadn't thought
monolithic organizations where they're not important, where they may be viewed as just one of many other customers.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that angle, which would be true. Why would Oracle wanna work with us, or why would Microsoft want with us? Do you feel the caliber or quality of the salesperson could be less in a bigger name brand organization versus a smaller one?
In a way, yeah, I mean, there were certainly and there literally were times at Microsoft we would laugh in the beginning stages in 2000, right? When I was first working there, when we would tease orders would get faxed in, and there was a certain amount of that momentum that their brand was so strong, they were really hot in the market, and
Yeah,
there were, orders were just kind of coming in, you were the choice, right?
I couldn't imagine.
Right, I mean, what were you going to use instead of Office, right? I mean, it was just
Right, crazy.
kind
I
of
mean, I
that
wish I
was
had
the
that problem.
standard,
Yeah,
and that is certainly very powerful. But you're right, that does mean that the skill of the sales rep is not as required, to be as strong for those early sales. Where
right.
you have to develop, though, the stronger skills is as you continue to grow that customer, you continue to get into more competitive marketplaces, right?
Yeah.
Then you still need those things there, but there's an aspect to that that probably is,
Yeah. I managed recruiters. I think at our high time, I might have had 20 recruiters. And I don't think unless you're actually in a sales function, you realize how hands on you are, or probably should be when you're a sales manager. Did you tell me a little bit about how you coach and mentor? Tell me a little bit how that trickled down with the team. Because I know we were super hands on with our salespeople. We sat with them, we trained them, we went to sales calls with them. We'd had metrics meetings every Friday morning to make sure what was happening, what was in the pipeline. Is it still that aggressive nowadays? Or tell me a little bit about what your philosophy is on that.
I think it has to be hands-on management, coaching and development. My leadership style is what I would call servant leadership, which is
Okay.
essentially bottoms up, right? Making sure that your teams are empowered and enabled with everything that they need. They're closest to the customer. They're closest to the actual selling situations. So it's really critical to keep hands-on coaching situations in very open environments so that you're hearing the reality, right? It's never a top down, push down, go do this type of an approach, right? And you have to hear the real feedback, right? How are customers reacting in the market? What are the blockers that your teams are facing? How to motivate them, how to support them? What are they missing? Is there key enablement that they might be missing or something that hadn't been anticipated? Typical structure is a one-on-one with each person once a week.
Okay. So it is once a week. All
It
right.
is once a week. It's still
Okay.
once a week, and then you also would, on top of that, do some type of sales team meeting where you pull your whole team together because collaboration, best practices from each other are still all really important.
Right.
And then you would have disciplines around whatever your pipeline and forecast process are, right? You'll
Yeah.
do most likely pipeline review in your one-on-ones, but you will typically have some type of separate forecast process where you're going to go through especially
Sure.
larger
Yeah.
deals.
And I bet you don't see the forecast process in a smaller company. It's probably almost non existent.
Correct, and
Yeah.
that is one of the benefits we can bring in is the ability to look at a pipeline and to really weight and evaluate that pipeline, right? And then to bring a rhythm of forecasting discipline as well as, it just helps the small businesses plan. It's very difficult for them to know how to plan out their own resources, their own cash flow, et cetera, without
Right.
knowing an accurate forecast, but
Yeah.
so, yes, it is something that's one of the key things we will bring to them.
So if you think about some of the people that worked for in the past, is there any one person that stands out in your mind that just for some reason was the rocket ship? Like are there any characteristics or anything similar among people that are rainmakers as we call them?
I did have several strong people, and it felt like every role that I was in, there was always at least your top one or two, right? You can
Yeah.
always evaluate and come to the top who consistently performed. What I would say is I don't know that there was one trait, but there were a couple key traits that I think were critical. First and foremost, it was actually a dedication to the customer's success. Always
Mhm.
starting it out was not, I have to sell this for my company. It was more of the, I want to help this customer solve a problem or a pain point. And it was a very, very genuine, vested interest in doing the right thing with the customer. And that created environments where the top performers were closer to the customers. And it was a
Sure.
joint selling process. It was not being sold to, right? And even
Yeah.
in your very large, complicated deals with larger companies, it was still that same construct had to be there. That there was that passion or mission around, and they were successful in identifying meaningful pain points that could be solved with a variety of different technologies, et cetera. The second is a calm demeanor, no panic throughout the process. Right? Self confidence that what you can do for them and deliver for them, and walking the customer through the cycle. And then a lot of it is just hard work. I don't think there's any magic behind sales.
Right?
It is doing the research, it's following through, it's sitting in on if there's demos or different sales presentations, it's making sure customer references are checked ahead of time so that there's no surprises in the process, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's all of the extra above and beyond work that goes into making
Yeah.
a, a trusted advisor. The salesperson should feel like a trusted advisor to their customer.
Salespeople get a really bad rap out there. Right? You're like, yeah, I know.
Right, right.
Well, look, recruiters get a really bad rap. So we're like a subhuman of the sales organization. We're considered used car salesmen. Like that's how people talk about recruiters. So in the hierarchy of sales, maybe your team is here. Well, the recruiter teams are down here. And it's interesting because now that you're on your own, you're spending a lot of time on LinkedIn probably because that's what we do as solopreneurs. We try to go there for leads because it's a business platform. And man, it's brutal out there on salespeople. They talk about and I'm gonna ask you what you think of these things, right? So you talk about it's a little I also feel like and I'm gonna ask you this too. All right, I have 2 parts to this. They call something, and I'm sure you've heard it called pitch slapping. Have you heard
Mhm.
pitch slapping? When you're going into DMs and LinkedIn and you don't really know the person and you're pitching to them. And people get super offended by this. Like, and maybe it's the segment I'm keying in on. I tend to see it a little bit more with younger generations than older generations, maybe because the older generations are kind of used to salespeople. I don't know. Maybe they're used to that pitch. I don't know. But what I see out there is people being really offended by these DMs and I was thinking to myself, these people who are complaining, right? Somebody in your organization is out there hoofing it to get sales to employ you, right? Do you know,
Right,
I
right,
think
right, right,
people
right.
lose
You have a
respect.
sales org of your own, correct.
Either
That
you
is
have a
out there.
sales org of your own and you're doing it, or you're part of a company that's employing you, and maybe you're not in a sales function, but the only way you're employed is because there's salespeople driving revenue to pay for your salary. And I think people just don't think of it like that because if you've never sat in that seat and know how hard a job that is, I don't think that there's a good understanding of it. I get irritated by it. I kind of think give people a break, right? Like if you're not interested, then don't respond. It's okay. But as you know, in sales, timing is everything in sales. I mean, you could call on someone for 2 years and they don't need you. Then all of a sudden, one day they're like, oh, I need to call Renee. She's been bugging me for 2 years or she's been friend for 2 years. But what have you seen out there? I feel like sales is so different than it used to be. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't mean once you're a customer, it's a relationship. But what are you seeing with cold calling? What are you seeing with cold emails?
So before I get to that, you hit on a passion point of mine, which
Go
is
ahead.
that whole sales. No, the profession of sales is not as well respected as it should be, and it is something that really, really does bother me and annoy me. And people don't realize that you have to be really good at your job. It takes a lot of skills to pull together to be a good salesperson, right? And that yes,
Yeah.
people can make a lot of money in sales. And so
Right.
it's a lucrative career. It's a rewarding career. Every day is completely different, but there is this bad rap that still sits out there. unfortunately, and I think it's given to the industry by some of the bad selling analogies that, your pushy car salespeople,
Sure.
pushy salesperson of any type, telesales, telemarketing, that constant
Any of it.
badgering, people feel like, right, they're getting sold to. So I think at the end of the day, whatever you're doing in terms of outreach, and in terms of your calling campaigns, you have to make sure that it doesn't feel like you're pushing a product at someone and that you are trying to sell them, because no one really wants to be sold. They
Right.
want to be consulted with, or they want to feel like you've helped them solve a problem, right? But no one wants to feel like they were just sold. And I think that's part of the ongoing challenge in the industry. And automation in some ways has made it worse because now you could do a lot more outreach faster, right? But then you're just
Yeah, there's a
almost
lot of noise.
correct. There's more
It's
noise.
and it's
There's
hard
more
to
noise and you're inundating and you've got more channels to inundate now,
yeah.
right? You've got not just email and text and phone, and still people going back to physical mail now sometimes because it's a way to get through some of that noise.
I was gonna ask you that. I have thought about doing that. I have thought about so I'm very targeted about who I reach out to, right? I know the people I can help. Again, old emails tend to not get a response
A
if they
lot of the
don't
spam filters tend to take them out, so you don't even get through.
you don't even know if you're going through it, but I have usually a 50% open rate. I have a really good open rate and very low unsubscribe rate. So that's okay for the long term, you're kind of nurturing the relationship, but if I see somebody hiring I'll give you an example. I'm not gonna say the name of the company, but they had a controller role open. They also had a project accountant role, and it was, in engineering, and I worked real heavily recently in construction and engineering, and I know people for this company. And they're smaller and they've had it open and their ad's not gonna find that person, especially in some areas. It's just you have to outreach for this type of role, and there's no recruiter employed there. So I need to reach out to the CEO and say, "Look, I can help you. Have people that I can call
I have
right now."
candidates that would be good for
Depending
you.
on how I mean, you can't really say that because you know how much they're paying and all that kind of stuff, but you can say, "Look, I've built a network here. I can help you with this. Let's partner up." And I thought about as part of I usually send a LinkedIn invite, then I do a DM, then I send an email sequence, right? And then I cold call. And then if I don't get a response for any of that, you only can do that so much before you're irritating someone. Although the old sales routine was like, you're at zero anyway. What does it matter, right? You have that whole concept, right? But I thought, should I write them a note? Should I handwrite them a note and drop it in the mail with a bubble thing to see if they open it up? Part of me is you have to give someone A for effort for that, right?
Well, and I think what we've seen is, again, it's anything that is different or unique. Where we've seen some handwritten emails work really well, and I mean, I think overall to get someone's attention,
Handwritten correspondence or emails?
handwritten mails, yes,
Okay.
where was combined with a specific action, like a trade show. For example, one of my clients was at a trade show and they had the list ahead of time of who was attending. And there were roughly 1,000 nurses that were going to be at the show. And there was a
Okay.
certain population of them that they
Yeah.
wanted to target. They sent out 1,000 mails, handwritten, and they literally were a handwritten address. There's a company that will do handwritten for you, that will do handwritten
I
campaigns.
don't do that kind of volume, but it's an interesting concept. We'll have to let me
The
know what that is.
handwritten makes somebody open it instead of looking like it's automated, and the offer was stop by the booth and we'll give you a pair of free custom insoles, which was nice because nurses rose on their feet, da, 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 da. 60 people walked to the booth and handed in their card to get their free
So
insoles.
what's that percentage? 6%?
6%, which is pretty high.
That's not a bad conversion.
No, it's a good conversion. It's a good
Yeah.
conversion. It's much higher than the old days when even I think people would look at 1 or 2% conversion is strong.
Yeah.
So it's a 6% conversion. Now, again, you had to have targeted, what were you trying to get to somebody? I know people will still right. So there are just I think everyone is trying to get that initial attention. The initial attention to get your message across
Yeah.
is still
It
the
takes
most
a lot
challenging.
of steps and you have to so there is you have to hit them in a multiple different communication channels and you still have to be persistent. You can't be a one-hit wonder.
I think it's 7 or 8. Someone has to see something
Touches.
7 or 8 times, 8 yeah, 7 or 8 touches before it
Yep.
recognizes in their
It's a lot.
brains.
Yeah. That's why you have to be very focused on who your, ideal client profile is because you can't spend that kind of attention on, Do you try to do a volume? I don't think volume works nowadays. I think you have to be very specific and try to nurture those results and know who you're going after. But I mean, it's a challenge, especially when you're a solopreneur, you're doing everything else, right? You're doing all these other things and it takes a lot of time. Researching takes a lot of time.
Well, and you hit on one of the points that's so key, which is you're identifying your ideal client or
Right.
your ideal target market.
Yeah.
Companies, small and medium sized, some larger ones potentially too, don't understand their differentiated value enough. If you don't understand, first of all, what makes you truly different than someone else, and there's a lot of competition and noise always. There's no one out there who offers something truly on their own, but you need to differentiate very strongly so that you can identify your ideal client. And then, as you said, instead of spray and pray, which we call it, which was throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and hope something hits, right? Far better approaches are to identify this is the client I want to go after and
Yeah.
build and nurture that channel over time to
Yeah.
make sure that you know they're going to be a qualified prospect once you actually get to
Yeah,
them.
it's not from my perspective, from my own business, it's very easy to figure out who needs my help. It's not that difficult to do some research and think because the companies that need my help are the ones that just put a posting out there and they don't really have any other process or system or recruit or anybody. They just have the team. So after referrals and after a posting, if it dries up, that's it. They've got
Mm,
nowhere to go.
right, right,
They just
right.
don't, and no one really knows how to recruit, and they're running a business. They don't have time to do this.
Do that often, right? The recruiting in of new talent is not their primary job.
No, and also, what's your opportunity cost of running your business, right?
Right, what
That
are
you
you
shouldn't be
foregoing in the
yeah.
meantime, correct?
What are you forgoing in the meantime? A lot, and I think sometimes they lose perspective because it's not cheap, like, I get it. It's not a cheap service, but you also can't get some of those strategic roles wrong in your company because it can wreak havoc. It can cost you a hell of a lot more money, especially if you're in a
Well,
in a a
if
CFO
you
or a
end up
chief sales
having
officer or any of those roles that have direct impact on the security even of the company, and the risk of the company. I always talk about that. When you hire, you really have to think about the risk of that position and how you're handling that because don't underestimate that. So, what's the biggest team you've managed? And do you have any like
80
good
80
management
people?
secrets to share? Any kind of little golden nuggets to salespeople or managers out there? Because I mean, again, I don't think people get how hard. And one thing with sales that I learned the hard way, and I'd love to hear your perspective of this, is you have to be careful the activity that you want from your people and what you are reinforcing because you can get the wrong outcome. So I had this one young man, and I'm not going to say his name, but I wonder if he learned a lesson from it. He was new to recruiting. I was training him, and we have a quota, right? You've gotta reach out to so many you've gotta build a lead list, all these things, and you have to document it in your CRM. Like, we have to know what's happening with what you're doing, right? And he was putting false documentation because he couldn't keep up with it was like 50 calls a day. It shouldn't be a problem. But instead of coming to me and saying, "I'm drowning a little bit," like, he was falsifying information, and I fired him. Ended up letting him go because
You
I
had to because, right, it was a breach of confidence there,
I mean, everything, right? And now I have a database that had garbage in it, and I don't even know what
and you
was
had to figure out, right, what needed to be cleared out or
yeah. Yeah, so when you build and building an incentive sales program is difficult. There's a lot of things to consider. Is there any type of advice or your experience with that?
I think first and foremost is to make sure that the owner or the management of the company knows what goals are they trying to achieve? What
Yeah.
behavior do you wanna reward your salespeople for? Too often, I'll see, like, a generic comp plan where it doesn't have nuances, it's not tied to the most profitable products or service lines, or it's not
Yeah.
and so you could be rewarding behavior that's not as profitable for you unintentionally, right? Or you will create confusion so that the salespeople are not very, very clear on where they're going to see. 'Cause one of the worst things you can have is a complex plan with the salespeople don't believe in, because then they're afraid to go
Right.
follow certain things. They don't think they're really going to get paid out on it, right? If
Yeah.
territories confusing, if deals could be stolen by someone else, and
The
all
quote
of
is, like,
that.
unrealistic, you're never gonna achieve it. Yeah.
And realistic quota setting is a critical component of it because it is not just aspirational. It has to be based on something that is achievable.
Yeah.
You can't give someone some quota that they're never going to make, and then they know right away, early into the year, that they're not going to make their targets
So they
and the
stop
numbers
probably
and the
trying
comp
then, right?
plan correct. Or
Yeah.
you'll see sandbagging where, okay, fine, I'll just have a great year every other year. I can hoard everything
Interesting.
into one cycle. You will see situations where people have overachieved, done really well, and then they'll hold on to some deals and wait for the following year so that they could create their own spread.
They're crafty. I mean, these they can be crafty,
It's
right?
survival. Most salespeople
Yeah,
want to be in
that's true, and
multiple years. They want to be in their roles multiple years. They don't wanna keep
yeah.
changing. No one wants that on your resume, that
Well, and
cycling
nobody wants to
through, and
start rebuilding a client base. I mean,
'cause then you're starting out with right, you know you've gotta do all that hard work, and your commissions are gonna be down and
right.
all of that while you're building that territory.
It's exhausting. Yeah. So what have you it probably really depends on the business what
It
works
does depend on the
probably.
business. I am honestly the one thing I'm not a fan of, I am not a fan of 100% commission models.
That's what I was gonna ask you. What are
I
you
almost
seeing?
always believe that they fail because it's essentially the owner's putting all the risk on the salesperson,
Yeah,
right?
like, that's
And not
baloney.
investing in the salesperson's success. You at least have to give some type of guarantee or something like that while the person is ramping up and while they're building their territory,
Yeah,
because they will always be looking for another job. Anyone who's on 100% commission, unless they have already built out a book of business that they know they can achieve on,
right.
going to be looking for a better job.
I think they did that anymore. I don't know how you can
Well,
expect.
unfortunately, they do. Yes, there's
Really?
certain
Is
markets, certain businesses, yeah. And I think sometimes small business owners think that that's a nice way to break into it. I can hire some salespeople, da 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 da. Da. And right now, the market is you do have some talent out there. I actually just had a small business owner about a month ago hire somebody on a commission only basis, and
but
I tried to
sales
advise
positions
them
are like the
differently.
sales positions are the number 1 most in demand position, just year over year, you always need them, down or up. If you're down, you better get a salesperson or get your company up. But you really think there's some talent out there now on the sales
I
side?
do. Especially in certain industries. I think in tech, there's been a lot of layoffs
Mm.
and cutting back in tech. So I do think there's a lot of talent out there. I think in financial services, I think in yes, I do. I really do. A lot of large companies that have chosen to trim, so to speak, their and they've not added net new sales positions. So I think what you've had out there is a combination of some trimming in the market along with adding new positions at a lower rate that yes, there are people are taking them longer to find the right roles.
Yeah, interesting. It's always cyclical. It typically, when we're in these kind of softer markets, people always believe it's across the board. It's usually never across the board. It's usually in industry segments for sure.
Right, right.
What about when you go into, I'm just curious, when you go into an organization, what is your assessment to figure out what's broken or not? How do you approach it?
We actually have an assessment process, an assessment tool. So
Okay.
there's a level one assessment, which has 10 questions that we like to
Okay.
see the owner and one or two other people answer.
Okay.
That determines the various processes in place today and
Yeah.
how things are done. And then we also have a much deeper assessment and discovery process that once a client signs up, you go in and you dig in much deeper into the areas because it's really important to get to root cause problems before you start prescribing what could be changed
Right. Right.
because you might see a surface issue over here. Um, for example, declining sales. And that might imply it could mean a lot of different things though. It could mean you lost one big client. It could mean
Right.
you're starting to lose in a market share, you're losing consistently across segments, or you're
I mean,
only
a million
losing in
different
one
reasons. Yeah.
product, your price is off, etc.
Sure.
You do
Yeah.
need to correct. And so
Yeah.
you start out with these tools as well as in-person conversations and meetings with people.
What kind of pushback do you usually get from the CEOs? Do they get defensive at all? Do they cover like what tell me I mean, usually if they want you to come in, they need some help, right? But still,
Correct. Correct.
You know
I think like anything, there is the sensitivity to what's worked before, right? So they if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
So it is the pointing out of what was not optimal, right? Or
yeah,
I think the biggest challenge is actually though, because usually I like to vet and make sure I'm bringing on CEOs that are open to change and that they're coachable.
yeah.
But there's usually blind spots around certain salespeople or certain performers. Somebody's been there a long time,
Well, that's a big deal with it, yeah.
they have a history, and they tie, loyalty means tremendous amounts to them, right? Of course. But
It's
they
a
will,
usually a big life force in a small company. Yeah, I know, I've been in those scenarios where I've had to let people go in small companies that were poisonous to the like, to the organization. Yeah, and
and
they
so that
really
is
have a
where I
hard
think
time
the
with it.
blind spots, the most common blind spot you'll see is not seeing some challenges. Doesn't always mean the employee has to be let go, but more turning around that, you know,
Right, right.
top performer may be toxic and hurting other employees in the organization so that
Yeah,
they are not performing at the levels that they can, or they're stealing the best deals, right? And gee, what a surprise that every year they look
yeah,
good
yeah,
because it was
yeah.
at the expense of the success of the rest of the team.
So since this is the hiring room, I have to ask you, what's the biggest organization that you have run as far as amount of people?
I had an organization of 80 people. It was
80
in
people.
4, right, 80 people.
80 people. So tell me about your hiring philosophy. What have you crafted for yourself to vet the top performers in an interview, which is very difficult to do, I would imagine? Share that. Tell me.
I'll get into culture at one of the last points, but in the
Okay.
beginning, I think first of all, you really have to vet for facts because there is an ability to kind of maybe overinflate or misrepresent things. So for one thing I look for is people who've been in an organization a long time. Because if you're a job hopper in sales, it implies that you have not been successful. So I do have a tendency to be really critical or to
Mm.
avoid people who have job 18 months, 12 months, 18 months, 18
What
months.
do you consider stable enough? Like, what do you consider enough to get
I like
traction?
to see at least 3 years at a company so that they came in, worked a territory, and achieved numbers in that territory, right?
How do you confirm those numbers? I mean, people
That is where it's so difficult, you can't. So
no,
that's where I look for people that have been in their roles or at their companies 3 to 5 years plus.
because otherwise they'd been let go if they weren't
Correct,
performing. Is that your thing?
correct,
Okay.
correct, correct.
All right.
So that is one of the ways that I will look at it just to try to vet out someone who maybe has been a challenged. And I find that new business hunters, it's different and it's even harder for them than account managers who are working existing business. Both are critical roles.
Well,
Both
there's
are
a
critical
right, but
roles.
there's a totally different ballgame.
Correct, correct, correct. And so the new business hunters are by far the more difficult roles to vet
Sure.
because you are big game hunting all the time. And so you may have cyclical results. You may have the feast or famine type of approach to you. So one thing I always look for is continuity. And then I ask them very specifically to walk me through their sales process and their sales cycle. Walk me through from start to finish the whole process because
Wait,
then
what do
you
you
get
do? How do you handle it? What do you say?
correct,
What's your process? Yeah, like very, very granular, I bet. And
correct,
now
correct.
are you doing that to see if it's in alignment with your philosophy or just
In
what
that
other
case, it's mostly validating facts, credentials, as well as starting to look for culture. Because I
okay,
always believe too that cultural fit has to be there to the organization. And
especially in the sales.
every company has its own culture. The Microsoft
Yeah.
culture could not have been more different than the Oracle culture. Could not have been. One was very
Between you said
collaborative.
Microsoft and Oracle?
Right, Microsoft was highly collaborative,
Okay.
wanted people that worked well together, worked well across groups. They deliberately did not want to have competing metrics and goals for a person.
Oh,
If anything, you would almost
interesting.
end up double metricing somebody just to make sure they were incented to work with you. Oracle was very cutthroat, the opposite of it. Multiple salespeople would be competing against each other within the same company. And so it creates a very, very different environment. And
I would think that would be not be
the
good.
type of salesperson who thrives at Microsoft is not typically one who's going to thrive then at Oracle.
Right, right.
So that culturally, you have to know your cultural fit. I think also too varies by your company that you're hiring for, but your industry is important. How much does someone know already
Yeah, how
about the industry and how quickly can they ramp?
let me ask you that. So, because I always have arguments with this with people in accounting and finance, because accounting and finance, GAAP is GAAP. You know what GAAP is? Maybe not.
Yes,
It's
yes,
generally
I do.
accepted
Well, I
accounting
do.
principles. So it's
I was actually a CPA right out of college. Yes,
you're a
yeah,
closet CPA. That's
I
right. Just like
am. I
me.
am.
All right. So yeah, I have to tell you. Well, for the audience, GAAP is generally accepted accounting principles. There's a framework that is adopted. So there's consistency for apples and apples. Anyway, that's my spiel for the day. So GAP's GAAP. It didn't matter what industry. Now, don't get me wrong. Hard to take some out of banking and put them in manufacturing because manufacturing is super complicated, right? It's the accounting is more complicated, but you've got bank regulations. But so how important is industry and sales to the point where you have 2 people? I got 2 people. I've got this rock star salesperson that you vetted that you believe is really a hunter, never been in the industry, and you've got maybe a B player out of industry. Which one would you take?
It depends on the industry itself because
Okay.
some industries, the learning curve to understand the industry is so great and so long. For example, pharmaceuticals. If you're in pharmaceuticals, if you're in med tech and you're in some of these industries, energy, where they're highly, highly specialized, your learning curve to ramp up is going to be very high.
Hmm.
And your customers that you're calling on will expect you to meet them at their level. A lot
That's
of other industries, though, I think a strong, strong hunter can learn an industry fairly quickly, not in depth, but they can learn at a high level the most important things about the industries and the pain points and how to talk to a customer about them. You'll just have to tag team them with somebody then who can help them through that learning curve.
yeah, right. You'll have to pair them up with somebody or help
Usually a
them.
sales engineer or something of some sort.
Yeah, on the technical side of things. Yeah. I have a friend of mine who was an Air Force pilot, and he actually, flew the, U-2s, those the ones that go all like, in space, like, the plane's so high, it's 70,000 feet or something, you have to wear a spacesuit. So, he's in the aerospace industry as a PMO, that's where he went after he got out, after he 20 years there. But he joined a company that's building these huge drones for their military drones, and he goes with the salespeople on the sales calls because he's got an engineering degree and he's kind of has a sales personality anyway. Like he'll talk to anybody, but they team him because it's so technical that they still have to team him with it. And he's on the road doing that. I think it's just really interesting. I mean, it makes sense because
And
he's
you
got it.
do see that in more of those heavily specialized industries or
Yeah.
deeply technical industries because, for example, if a seller is supposed to try to help represent and promote 20 or 30 different products, they can't be deep in any one of them, right? But so that's where that tag teaming often takes
Yeah,
place.
and he's dedicated. He's considered business development. He's dedicated to
Yep.
that team.
And kind of comp plan tied to their success.
Yeah, probably. I mean, he's having a blast with it, but it's really interesting stuff, but he doesn't have to do the tough stuff of trying to get in the door. He's going on the sales calls.
Right. He gets to come in once the door is open.
Yeah,
Right.
once the door is open, he's kind of walking in with them, which to me is a lot easier than the other part, but that's just it's me having both roles in my life, which I'm sure you have had as well. So do you feel like you've been pretty successful in your hiring?
I have. I have. What I liked to look at, and again, when I was at Microsoft 20 years, so I had a long time
You were there a long
pattern there
time.
to
Okay.
see to see the success of people over time, right? And we
Yeah.
had very strong attrition metrics, right? We were gold on having high attrition, meaning that you kept the right people, right? I mean, certainly there were people that you may had to make decisions on. But so, and what I judge as success on that was were people having the best years of their careers? Were people fulfilling their
Mm,
career? Whether it was to be an individual contributor and
yeah,
just, great earnings years, or whether it was to move up developmentally within the organization, right? Which I had, was very fortunate to have created, on my team, several people who also then became leaders and
that's
moved on
nice.
to leading other people.
But again, that's Microsoft sounds like they were pretty nurturing
They
with their
were. They were.
yeah, they were very nurturing with their people. They wanted to retain the best. They showed them a path. They had a game. It sounds like an amazing organization.
At the time, And I know everything has always changed too. At
Yeah.
the point in time they were there, they were very fortunately growing a lot in the market. I think like everybody now today, people are still challenged by the
Yeah.
onset of
Yeah.
what is, and everybody's always trying to do more with less. So they were a great organization, but you were extremely lean, and they've become even
Mm.
leaner. They have become even leaner over time.
Interesting. Okay. So you've got to have some crazy sales story. Is there any sales story that comes to mind, whether it be a person or some crazy thing that happened? I mean, I've got them. I've got all kinds. I've got people drunk at jobs. I've got people that someone got shot in the morning. I have all kinds of things. But what anything that
Yeah, I have a couple I probably shouldn't say, yes. We had one situation where it was the customer who unfortunately got very drunk, and that got very awkward, but we will not we won't tell that one. Probably
really?
the
Because you
wildest
were back in the day, you've had a career where back in the day people drank when they went on sales calls, right? I mean, people drank at lunch back in the day
this was a dinner.
or
So,
dinner.
yeah, I think I was yes, we were easing out of the sale yeah, easing out of the drinking at lunch. It was more at dinner. But I did have a couple wild situations, like one where the sales rep fell asleep in the meeting. That was not positive,
Oh
that
my
was not good
god.
for right?
Were
But,
you there? Were you in
I
the
was,
room?
I was,
Did you
I
see him
was.
start or heard
At the
her nod
time, I
off?
was in a different position. I was doing the demo, so, yes, it was a different situation. Then I've also had, remember being down in, like, at Stockyards Bank in Paducah, Kentucky, so very small, very funny part of the world, and we're in a serious meeting, and a Stockyards truck of animals just goes by really loud, really wild, and it was like to them, it was normal. That was just a day-to-day occurrence.
I
It
wonder what
wasn't
the smell
fair
was
to
like. How
me.
about the smell?
Yeah, that came with it too because
We had a
windows
I
were
had a
open.
client who was in the meat business in Chicago, and maybe it was called Stockyard Meat. I don't remember what it was called, but when you went to the site to visit, you're just like, I mean, it stunk. It smelled like rotten meat. I guess, you get used to it. I think they did steaks and stuff. Yeah, I think it was a slaughterhouse. I mean, they were slaughtering animals there. They'd truck them in and they'd slaughter 'em. Like, well, I guess we can't complain if we're the ones eating the steak, right? I mean, this is
Right,
the
you get
reality
fresh
of it.
bits of meat, but right, right.
It's the reality of it. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I've had some really
How about
crazy
you? So
stories.
what is your craziest story?
I would say my most stressful story, maybe not the craziest, but I'll tell you my most stressful story. So this is very early on in my career. I joined a startup back in 2001 and I was put on the temp team. This is like account temp stuff, right? And we were brand new. So I spent 8 hours a day cold calling. That's what I did. I'd cold call, get someone on the phone, ask them to meet me and top of a cab. Like that's what I did for 8 hours to the point where I had strain on my arm from doing so many cold calls. I was really good. People would agree to meet me and not even know why they met me. I was just really good at it, but it's exhausting. Anyway, so I had met a CFO in a meeting and they had called me up and so it was like 4 o'clock on a weekday. And they're like, Renee, our payroll person just quit. We got to have someone in here tomorrow morning. Like, you've got to get a payroll person for me. Well, we had just met somebody who kind of hit all the boxes. But back in the day, we had an application that the people had to hand write. They had to sign off on it. We had references. Like, we did a lot of checking. And so we sent the guy in the next morning, but we hadn't checked everything yet. Right. So I started checking everything. Nothing was panning out. Couldn't verify anything on this guy's application. Like, and he was supposedly worked at Accenture. References, one guy sounded like a neighbor. And so I was breaking, he's in payroll. And this is a small like, healthcare company, but I think they were a nonprofit. So I didn't know what kind of controls they had. Let's go back to accounting, right? I don't know what kind of internal controls. So I'm breaking out in this one, like, oh my God. So I had to go tell my boss. Like, this point, I'm just like a staffing person. So I was like, oh, we got a problem. We have this guy on and nothing's checking out. He's like, and they're like, oh my God, we got to get this guy out of there. So I call the client about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, oh, hey, how was so and so doing? They're like, oh, he's doing fantastic. We love the guy. Like, no, he's doing great. What's his rate? Like, if we were going to hire him full time, what would it be? And I'm just and I said, "You know what?" I said, we're in the area. Do you mind if we stop in at lunch? We're gonna just check in with him because you did that back in the day. You did drop it back in the
Right,
day.
right.
And we'll talk. They're like, "Oh yeah, Renee, come on down." It was like in Skokie or Evanston or something. So my boss and I jump in his car. We drive up there and we go see the guy and we ask him to come outside with us. And we say to him, "We know you lied about everything. We're taking you to the train." So we take the guy off site. we put and he's the guy's in the back seat and I'm in the front seat, and I'm like, I
I
don't
don't
wanna
wanna
put my
drive with him. Right, 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 right.
person choke me or something, you know? And so, yeah,
And
so
he
we
never
drove
tried to deny it? He didn't try to
Nope.
deny any.
He never did. He just was like, didn't say anything. He was kind of embarrassed. And so we drove him to the train and we dropped him off. We're like, this is it. And then we went to the client. We had to do damage control. So we
Wow.
had to admit that, hey, we just had to tell
We
him, like,
hadn't done our due diligence at the
we didn't do
time
our
we
due
sent him over.
diligence. We had met, and I had told him we just met the guy, right? And so luckily nothing happened. No money was taken. I'm like, nothing was wired. And we reserved the relationship. But, if you're a person that's honest, you just don't think that things like that happen.
Correct. You just
I
trust that
actually had
somebody's
someone who worked for me that said they had and I'm not gonna say the university because then someone may figure it out on this podcast, but they said they went to it was a very prestigious university locally, said they went there, and I could never verify it. And I also had some these aren't crazy stories, but my point is, like, people do lie. Not
they
as
do. No, I had an employee once work for 2 different companies. He was working for us as a new account salesperson. At the same time, he was also trading. This was long enough ago. He was trading on the options exchange in Chicago. So and he was
Wow.
submitting false expense reports with what he was doing, who he was calling on, all this type of stuff. And 6 to 8 months, new account person can fudge the type of activity that they're doing, right? You're not gonna
Yeah,
necessarily on a big sale
yeah,
close a lot yet,
yeah.
but right,
I mean, I've
right.
had people drunk on the job when we did a lot of temporaries. I've had people call in, someone got shot. I mean, you could do a sitcom in a bullpen in recruiting. I mean,
I'm sure.
the things that happen with people, especially if you're doing different levels. I mean, if you're just doing executive direct hire recruiting, it's not a big deal. But when you have like those different levels and you're doing clerical people, and we just did clerical people in accounting, we didn't do like general labor and things like that. And the person who was drunk was like an interim accounting manager or something. He was drunk on the job, and it was just it was terrible. Anyway, it's the people business. You never know what you're going to get. It's just the way it is. So let's just talk real quick. I've already captured you for a while here, if you don't mind. Is there any difference in how you manage women versus men? What have you seen in like female leaders versus male leaders, like in the sales organizations? Anything? No?
I actually try not to manage them differently. I mean, I think I've seen a phenomenal evolution and much more parity than there used to be, which has been great to see.
Okay. That's
So I
good.
have seen right, I have seen a lot of the evolution of and I've had both, many female leaders working for me. I've worked for both female and male leaders, etcetera. So I genuinely really do try not to
Mhm.
manage them differently. And I think most larger companies have done a good job of helping to create rules, almost policies around it that keep things fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
But
I
I
say
think
that because my female recruiters versus my male recruiters, I could manage them very differently. I had to be much more sensitive with the females and I had it with the men. I'm totally making a generalization. I feel like I could be a lot tougher on the men and they would bounce back a little bit quicker than I did with the females. And I'm a boy mom. I have 3 sons. And so for me, it was easier for me to manage men than it was for women because I don't think I spent as much time with women in a directive way. I spent more time with women as colleagues or friends, but I had, you know, and it wasn't by choice, but we had very male dominated environments that I worked in, like super dominated with men. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's recruiting in general. Probably should look at those stats.
tech is male dominated too. What I do
Yeah.
see though that in new account selling versus account relationship selling, I see a difference. I see more women will gravitate toward the account relationship selling
Yeah. Because you're
than
probably
the
more nurturing or maybe
correct.
just,
And it's a different skill set than raw
yeah.
cold calling, right?
Yeah.
And the ability to take rejection, right? The ability to so I do find that some of my best sellers have absolutely always been women who've been able to develop these really phenomenal relationships at serving and taking care of their customers long
Yeah.
term,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And that's what I enjoy. I mean, I was really good at breaking into accounts because it was a necessity. We had to do it, but I have much more fun on the client nurturing side, account management. That's where I have the most fun. That's where you have those deep relationships. You get to know them so well. You can add so much value. It's just You get so much out of those relationships. I mean, I've gotten friendships out of those relationships. I mean, very close friends over
Completely
the years.
agree. It was an interesting lesson to me early on in my career where I was managing someone who turned out to be a phenomenal new account salesperson and was a
Yeah.
terrible account manager. He was not detailed oriented. So his
Mm,
ability to follow through and go through the painful details of something that went wrong and fix it, whether it was an
okay.
invoicing issue or whether it was
I
an
just wanted to, like,
implementation
get
issue.
in and move on, get in, move on, get on
And
yeah,
he
get
was
in and move
really
on.
good at that, and
Yeah,
it was one of those situations where when he ended up we moved him out of the company, but he ended up just soaring at the next place that he went
that's
because he knew
amazing. I
to
mean, to know
find.
that. I mean, I wish I was better at it. I did it I became good out of necessity because we had to do it, but I didn't necessarily enjoy the new business development, and I think that I'm probably better on the other end of it, even though people would say to me, "You can break it into any account." And I think just because I'm not a person that's nervous about it, I'm just kind of I just don't get uptight about it, but it's a lot easier to be in an account where someone already knows you when they pick the phone up?
Of course it
I
is,
mean,
right?
right?
Right, of course it is, and but it is a different type of nurturing of that
It
relationship.
is definitely you definitely have to put their needs first. It has to be about them. You've gotta try to solve their problems. I was always available ridiculous hours, and a lot of my clients, and they'll tell you this if you ask them, is that, I would feel their pain. I would be like, "Oh gosh, Becky needs somebody. I've got it." I would work all night because I know she was stressed out. Okay, we gotta get this figured out because she's stressed out. So if you're invested in the person, you end up just giving better service because you aren't really worried about yourself. You're worried about, to your point way early in this conversation,
Mhm.
taking care of your client makes the best salespeople and not worrying about. I always thought like the money comes if you take care of people.
Money will come, correct, the
If you
money
take
will
care of
come.
people,
If
the
you
money will
do the
come.
right thing
If you do
because
the right thing. Yeah.
then your customer will be happy, they will
Yep.
refer you, they will
Yeah, because
grow,
it's
etcetera,
trust,
etcetera.
right? I mean, it's trust, and that's the most important thing in sales is that they trust you, right? I mean, that's the key to it. So, anything else that you wanted to touch on that I haven't asked?
No, I think 'cause I know we're at time. I think we covered a lot. We did.
Yeah, we
I
did.
think
It's good.
just kind of my overall, recap of how strong the important sales is as a career and that it needs to continue to be developed and professionalized as a career. Because as to your point, organizations are not existing without sales, without growth. And it's not something that we can continue to underinvest in, right? The proper investment in having really, really strong salespeople and sales teams out there is just I can't underestimate the importance
Yeah.
of it to any single business.
Well, Susan, thanks so much for being on the hiring room. I hope you enjoyed yourself. You had some really good insight that I really appreciate. So, just so the audience knows, Susan is available for hire. She has her own consulting business as a fractional CRO. Is that the term you're using, Chief Revenue Officer? And she can find her on LinkedIn. If you can't find her, you can find me, and I'll make sure you find her. So she's really good at what she does, and she can literally talk about hiring somebody to change your EBITDA. That's a good investment. That's a good investment. Anyway, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Renee.
Thanks for joining me in the hiring room. If you like the podcast, please subscribe below and share this episode with someone you think that would benefit from it. We're always looking for good people to interview. So if you have a referral, comment below, or you can email me at renee@mseedinc.com. Thanks. Till next time.